Good morning. It is November the 28th, uh, 2021, as you probably know. And my name is Carrie West. I'm the pastor at Sunrise Church, which is where you are probably watching this video through our Facebook page or YouTube. So I welcome you. At whatever time you are tuning in to this morning brief. I just want to explain a little more about this morning brief. It's a time for me to share a little bit more from our scriptures that we use in worship on Sunday. It's just a time for me to lay a little bit of a foundation, if you will, or to share with you something that I'm just not going to have time in the service to share about the scriptures. I want to begin this morning, though, with a reminder that in the traditional church year, this Sunday is the first Sunday of Advent, and it's also considered the first Sunday of the church year. And so in the life of the church, because we pattern our lives within our faith a little differently than the world patterns life. So the calendar is one of those things that is different between how we pattern our faith life and the pattern of the world life. And we start with Advent because really the story of our faith always begins with this anticipation of what God is doing and creating. And we're always preparing and looking toward that which God is doing. Advent then becomes that season that we're anticipating this birth of Jesus. Now, you'll hear in the service today more about this already and not yet. We're not actually preparing for the actual birth. We are preparing, but we are not preparing for the actual birth of Jesus, but we prepare so that we might receive a rebirth of Jesus in our lives, that Jesus is always being born anew in our lives and in the lives of others. So this begins our faith journey. This is how we begin our church year. So in that case, Happy New Year to you. All right, so this morning, as you see behind me, we have a particular visual for our worship time this Advent. These are doors, as though they are the doors of the inn. Where Mary and Joseph has come seeking shelter. And as we know the story, then they are directed to a stable, and that is where Jesus is born. So these doors behind me and everything around it and behind it, just a hint, is all to kind of help us visualize this season and what it means to have these doors of our lives, maybe closed, maybe open. So we begin today by first just thinking about how it is that we make room and how we make room for hope. Now in Advent, each 4 weeks, there's 4 Sundays of Advent, there's a different word that's kind of the focus and theme. Today's word focus is hope. So how are we making room for hope? All right, well, one of the scriptures that we'll hear today is from Psalm 25, verses 4 through 5. Just going to read this real quick. You'll hear it also in worship. Make your ways known to me, Lord. Teach me your paths. Lead me in your truth. Teach it to me. Because you are the God who saves me. I put my hope in you all day long. All right, so God is our hope, right? We have hope because God is a saving God. God is always rescuing. Not in an enabling or unhealthy kind of rescue, like sometimes how we rescue others who really need to maybe do some of their own work, or that we're constantly, just covering up things, thinking that will help save people. No, God is a God who saves because God leads us through things. God leads us through hardships. God leads us through despair. God leads us through pain, grief, and God also leads us through joy and happiness, peace, comfort. God is a God, really the whole story of the biblical narrative, the whole story of God's history, where we see that God comes in and God saves the chaos at the beginning of all time. God saves the chaos and creates order, creates what we see as creation, this earth, the stars, the moon, the galaxies, anything that is known and all that is unknown. God has rescued from chaos and created order. Over and again, God has rescued God's people, whether Abraham, Sarai, Isaac, Jacob. The list is long. The Israelites escaping out of Egypt and from slavery. God is a God who saves. God brought God's people back from exile. Which is a part of the scripture we're going to read, the other scripture we're reading in worship in Jeremiah. God saved God's people from this sense of abandonment and disconnect from their faith. God saves us through Jesus and the birth. This is who God is. So when we hear the words of the psalm, teach me your ways, help me learn, show me your path. For God, you are the one who saves, and we put our hope in you. When we hear these words, and our hope is in this God who is constantly on our side. We put our hope in God who has continually showed up for us. Now, if we want to kind of bring this back, because that's a big picture and it's really, that's cool. But what does it really mean for me? I think about these last 20 months now of the pandemic with the news of a new variant that is so much worse than the Delta. How do we lean into this hope in God who saves? We are still being saved. We have been able to return to our worship space even in the midst of a pandemic. God has brought us through, and we are ready to worship in the sanctuary today in Advent, where last year we had to shift last minute because numbers got so bad and we had to protect our folks, and so we stayed online. Right? This is how God is working salvation in and through us. God is saving us in this process and along this way. And so we place our hope in this. The hope isn't that God saves and then it's just all done and we've made it and we've reached this destination. Putting hope in the God who saves means there are more steps on the path, that God is continuing to lead us into what is even more complete and more full. So on this first Sunday of Advent, you've got a little mini sermon on what it means to hope in the God who saves. And I pray that this truth will embody or surround you, embrace you, that you can really embody the hope of the world, the hope of Christ, the hope of God who saves us and saves all. So may you have a blessed Sunday. May you know fullness for even one moment today or whatever day it is that you watch this. Invite you to join us for worship at 10 a.m. You can watch live stream of our service, and you can watch it at another time because the videos stay up both on Facebook and YouTube. And if this has been helpful for you today, I invite you to share this video with someone who may need to hear more about this hope in our God who saves. So have a blessed day and hope to see you in church.